Welcome to a special program here on WBBZ-TV. John DeShula with you as we remember the crash of Flight 3407. Now, out of respect to the families, we'll discuss what happened, but I've opted not to use any of the video or photos of the crash as we talk about the 5th anniversary of that event. Because at 10:17 p.m., the night of February 12, 2009, it was a night that changed the lives of really everyone in Western New York forever. The crash of Continental Flight 3407 onto 6038 Long Street in Clarence Center, to be exact. 51 people died, including the unborn baby of a pregnant woman on board the plane, one person in the home, Mr. Doug Walensky. And that location at Long Street stands now as a place of solemn remembrance of what happened that cold night, a place for family, neighbors, and Western New Yorkers to gather annually for candlelight vigils and other events so we will never forget. One person who was taken way too early in life in that crash was Elise Ellie Kausner, her father, John Kausner, here to talk about his daughter, talk about the remembrance of what that night was like, talk about how his family is working to turn tragedy into something good for others, and the work of the families of 3407, what they've done to continue to push for change in modern aviation to make flying safe for all of us. John is joined on the set by Scott Biluski. Scott was Clarence Town supervisor at the time and worked tirelessly to pull together the efforts on so many levels at the crash site for the families, the community, an army of government officials, and of course the media. Scott is now an attorney, the law offices of William Mattar. And from the media, former WKBW reporter Steve Barber. He worked with me when I was news director at Channel 7 at the time. We were together the night we heard the scanners go off in the newsroom to begin what was nonstop coverage of a news event that changed the lives of those who covered it also. Steve is now a financial advisor for Merrill Lynch. So I welcome you all to our panel today. And John, I guess I really do have to start with you because suffering the loss of a loved one, a daughter, I just, you know, we talked about it before the show. Doing a program like this still opens up those wounds, but you've really, as a family, tried to make that loss into something much more positive for others.
We did. We were talking last evening, and frankly, we thought if it did bring despair and dejection into all our families' lives, Ellie would be mad at us. I think it does her no honor or whatever to just despair the rest of your life. She would be very unhappy if she knew she was the cause of our family breaking up and not being a positive force for one another. So we really have. We've bonded together more than ever that's possible and tried to carry on.
Now, you know, here you are running a successful construction company in Western New York, you know, and your family. What was that night like? I would think just an average night, you know, although, you know, you knew your daughter was on a plane coming back from the East Coast. What was that night like for you?
My wife and I were on vacation in the Keys in Florida. We're a very close family. Her sister Laura was at the airport with her nephew waiting for arrival and Ellie's boyfriend. Every single person, interestingly, in the family talked to Ellie while she was on the tarmac in New Jersey. So we had an opportunity to have that last conversation unbeknownst to us. And Mom said, you know, Laura, go pick her up at the airport. Chris, you go make sure the house lights are turned on, the heat's up, and the door's unlocked, and she can be taken care of. So we found out really through our other two children, Laura at the airport, and my son Chris actually was driving home from a soccer game about to pass the crash site when he was alerted there would have been a problem and began calling us.
And it was a cold and, you know, foggy night, a snowy night, but no indication that when you had that conversation, I guess, with your daughter, that there was really any problem going in. It was just a conversation like any other.
Well, actually, in New Jersey, not just my daughter, but several other family members who we become very close to, were all concerned. One lady actually got up and got off the plane.
Really?
Yeah, it was windy and they'd waited a long time. My 24-year-old daughter was aggravated for the delay. She wanted to get home. But yeah, they were concerned. In fact, the last thing she told her boyfriend was, if I don't make it, take care of my cats. So there was some, but I think that's intrinsic in human beings when you get on an airplane in bad weather. I don't think they had any innate knowledge. They just were concerned.
Well, and we'll jump now, Scott, to you, because you know, here it is in Clarence, you know, a very quiet community, you know, very nice community in Western New York, and as a leader in the community, now you're faced with this tragedy that just happened just like that. What was your instant call to action after you heard the news, and how did you hear the news?
Well, the way that I found out about it, John, was I was on my couch, and my wife had actually heard a plane, because we're right in the flight path ourselves. We live a few blocks from Long Street. And I heard a few seconds after what sounded like a a hollow metal door, like a fire door, slamming, kind of the garage fire door. But it was different, and I knew it wasn't that. And I got up and I started thinking back to the propane explosion in Buffalo in the 80s. And because I remember as a child feeling that, lived in Cheektowaga, and it was all the way out there that we felt the explosion, and there was just something. And my dad had always said, don't just sit there. If you hear something or feel something that's out of the ordinary, find out. So I got up, asked my wife if she felt it, heard something. She did, but we didn't know what it was. I looked in the garage. It wasn't something that happened in our garage. I then went outside, went out our front door, and I looked to the west and saw that the sky was lit up. It was an orangish pink, and I heard a lot of loud voices, not yelling, but loud voices. We live right along the creek that goes in back of Long Street, so it's a natural sound corridor as well. And I started calling around a few of my friends who are volunteer firefighters, our disaster coordinator and assistant coordinator, trying to find out what was going on. And eventually we were able to determine that it was a plane crash. And I say eventually, this is happening over the course of maybe 2 minutes tops. And I started to drive to the scene, got to the Four Corners, and it was diverted. I'm in the town vehicle, but as you mentioned, it was kind of foggy, the weather was unsettled, messy, so they probably didn't see it. I pulled over, and no sooner had I pulled over than I heard from our disaster coordinator, Dave Bissonette, we need to open up the Emergency Operations Center. So I turned right around, went the half mile or so to the town hall, and was met by our town custodian. And he came right out and said, what happened? Because he lives on Clarence Center Road with his family, right near Long Street. And they were trying to find out what happened. And I said, it was a plane crash, it's on Long Street. We need to open up the town hall for the Emergency Operations Center. And over the course of about 15, 20 minutes, the town hall was basically activity from door to door. You name the officials, you name the agency, all descending on the town hall, trying to establish the Emergency Operations Center, get the states of emergency for both the town and the county in order, and any other sorts of logistics. And then knowing eventually we would have to have a communication plan and press conferences, and determining where on the town hall campus would be appropriate for the press conferences, setting up the different agencies in the different town offices, just a bunch of things that had to be done in a very quick period of time. And we all thought in the back of our heads, we wanted to make sure that the information that we got out was accurate, that it was speedy, and we did not want to have to backtrack.
Well, and that's an amazing accomplishment considering, as you mentioned, the time frame in which you all pulled that together. And at night, after a long work day, and Steve, you and I were together in the newsroom when we heard the first scanners go off, and Tim Batt, who's here in our studio now as a photographer here at this station, was with us back there. And, we heard it was a small plane. And I recall, saying to you and reporter John Borst at the time, just go and see what it was all about. And we never looked back. And of course, our anchor Keith Radford, having his background in aviation, was able to determine early on that it probably wasn't a small plane. So what was that night like for you?
Oh, well, it's funny you say, because I vividly remember, and you talking about the hue of the sky, and there's so many details that you remember vividly from that night. But I was sitting at my desk, I just filed my story, it was being edited, and your ear gets trained after you've been in the business for so long that you hear something, you automatically know. And we jumped up, I pushed my chair back, and you said, just go. Literally, that's exactly what you said. Jumped in the car, and Timmy and I headed north, and I remember heading on transit, and when we got to Transit Road, my phone's blowing up, it's you, it's Keith talking to me, and we're trying to figure out what was going on at that point, and Timmy and I got stopped. We were probably a whisker away from just beating emergency crews to the scene. That's how fast we reacted to it. And when we get to the intersection, I forget where it was on Transit, I'm on the phone with Keith, and he's like, what are you seeing? What are you seeing? And I said, I'm counting emergency vehicles go by, and 1, 2, 3, and I said, Keith, I'm at 14. This is no little plane, because we initially thought Cessna. And I said, whatever happened, it's big. And John, who I think, the other reporter is the best in the business in terms of breaking news, was heading in north and actually got to the scene. And then you rerouted me to head over to town hall. And you're right, the flurry of activity that night was unbelievable. I mean, it was, you're snowing outside. I can still see the snow. I mean, it was a long and I honestly, for your family, it was far worse than what we were dealing with. But it was a long night. And like you had said, we were talking earlier before the show, and we said, everyone has a connection. And I, after I hung up with Keith, I called my father. And I called my mom. I said, Mom, where's Dad? And she said, he's right here. And I said, okay. She goes, why? I said, watch the news, hung up. But I knew he takes that flight all the time for business, regularly. And it scared me to death. That's one of my biggest fears in the business was, am I going to be, covering an event where I lose a family member? And I think that kind of put the night into perspective even before jumping off and realizing what we were doing.
Well, and I think everybody had some personal connection. I mean, now, in my case, Denise Hillary, who's a friend of mine, her sister perished in the flight, and she had texted me that night. And, your first instinct as a news director, I think, is to, you want to get that story. But, we'll talk about this in the next segment. I mean, how I reacted was out of respect because this person just lost a loved one and was looking for whatever information, that she could get. And I think the community reacted like that. Everybody was helping each other. And we'll talk about that and what the families of 3407 have done to help make air travel safe when Political Buzz continues. This is the website for Ellie's Angels, and this is in memory of Elise Kausner, John's daughter, who lost her life in the crash of 3407. And John, with that website, we talked in the last segment about how you've been able to turn this tragedy into something positive for others. What was that like for you on that night when you met the other families? What was that? Because I know everybody was sort of brought to the airport and sort of quarantined a little bit.
The airport was kind of a blur. We were primarily strangers. I'm from Western New York, so I knew half a dozen of the families maybe. But where we coalesced was in May of that year. We passed each other there. We were all in a trance, We didn't know each other. We were so involved in our own loss, we didn't really get to know except those I recognized. But in May of 2009, they had the first NTSB hearing. And I think we had 60 or 70 family members go to that. And what they talked about was so shocking to all of us. We walked out of the door, and my wife turned to me and said they murdered our daughter. And that was the sense of the majority of us sitting there because of the underpinning reasons for the accident. We held a meeting right outside the hall of the NTSB, and that afternoon, we started going to congressional and Senate offices and haven't stopped until today.
Well, and we've talked about how, like, Senator Chuck Schumer was a big supporter, and I recall in the days that, he would listen to you and the families, and of course the Western New York delegation with Brian Higgins also. And I always got the sense that they just didn't do it to patronize the families. They did it because they genuinely were really legitimately listening to your plight. And based on, the ultimate end that we found that, the pilot was, had made obviously an egregious mistake and probably shouldn't have been in that seat to pilot that plane. Your efforts then with the Western New York delegation were listened to, but it took a long time for others to really step up and listen. I remember Captain Sullenberger on the CBS This Morning show just a little bit ago. They talked about the anniversary of when he landed the plane on the Hudson safely, and Charlie Rose said, "Well, you've done a lot to change air safety based on that accident." He said, "Oh no, the families of 3407 in Buffalo, they're the ones." So what was that journey like?
Looking back, I can't believe we accomplished what we accomplished. We didn't know what we were getting into when we set out with our jaws set to knock on doors in Washington, D.C. We didn't understand how long it would take and how difficult it would be and how many we should have, but we didn't. It was incredibly difficult, time-consuming, a huge financial commitment for all the families. We didn't ask nor receive any outside help. We put our own time and energy into it. We spent thousands of hours down in D.C. talking, knocking on doors, attending hearings. And to Senator Schumer and Congressman Higgins, you couldn't have a better representative. Whether I agree or not, all the other things they do, that was from their heart. That was from their heart.
And I guess in the end, politically, you know, there has been some laws that have changed to try to make sure that pilots get the right amount of rest, that the training is vetted, you know, that the people who are flying the planes, we're putting our lives in their hands, know what they're doing. I mean, and there's still more to come, I would think. There's still more to do.
Yes, we have more hearings coming up. Actually, the next few weeks we're going to be back down there. And the airlines right now are beginning to push back and getting some traction. So it's going to be never ending. They're a $3.5 billion industry. We're a $35 group. So it's a hard battle, but we're committed to it, and we found some success.
And Scott, we talked about the politics of this, you know, in the sense that, you know, you're an elected official, you were an elected official at the time, and there were others, but people did work together to make this work. And then you had the FAA coming in and the NTSB, all these entities were coming in. What was that like to juggle that part of it?
There was a lot that was going on, but there were a lot of people pulling together for a common cause. And as long as we kept that in mind, that we were working as a group, we have a community to protect, to help out the families the best that we could in dealing with their loved ones and what the family members who were on 3407 and on the ground. And one of the memories that really comes back at this time of year was going to the Cheektowaga Senior Center. And some of the families were assembled there at the Senior Center, and a delegation of officials, myself, the mayor, state officials, federal officials, we went to let the family members who were there know that we were there to try and help, and if there's anything that we could do to reach out and help them. And one of the things that really stood out was there was a family who just the look on their face and the way that they felt, it was tremendous. I just felt drawn to them. Something was going on, and there was a priest who was with them, and that priest was Father Joe Moreno, and it was the Eckert family. And just finding out and knowing more about them and what they have gone through, whether it be September 11th or February 12th, and knowing that their family members who were on the plane, they were loved, and trying to do the best that we can to help them. And they were really the first family that I reached out to then and there. And it was just, there was just this connection that I felt that I needed to say something to let them know that I know they're going through at the time and still tremendous difficulties. And if there's any way that I, no matter how small, could reach out and help, I was going to do that.
Steve, I always found that one of the more challenging pieces of the news puzzle was when there was human tragedy, how you cover that story respectfully. And we have talked about how the media really were respectful all across the board. But yet at the same time, you had to get the information out, you had to be precise, and you had to talk to the rest of the country based on all the satellites, that services that you were feeding with Fox News and others. So what was that challenge like to talk to somebody like Scott to get the information?
Sure. I mean, well, in terms of coordination, their efforts were amazing. I mean, there's no manual that tells you, when something of this magnitude happens, here's what you say to the media. And even if you can't say anything to the media, you tell them you can't say anything to the media, which is something that we appreciated as reporters. Otherwise, you're left there for hours and hours and hours on end, which leads to speculation, which leads to what, and you don't want to go that route. So, I mean, it did a tremendous job that evening. I was really, really impressed. But, I was at headquarters waiting and trying to do some information gathering. And soon after it all happened, we knew. I mean, the media knew what had happened. And your son, we had talked about this, had come that night and was one of the first people that had came to town hall. Yeah. And I was one who walked over to him. And I saw, like I said, you can vividly still see things. And I can vividly still see him standing against the wall with his sweatshirt on and his ball cap. And I asked him who he was. And I said, what are you waiting for? And as I said, I want to talk to you. And he asked me what had happened and what I knew. And like you said, John, we knew. I mean, we knew at that point. But I wasn't about to say, listen, your sister didn't make it. Tell me what you're thinking.
Right.
And I think that's where, in some respects, you're fortunate that this is Buffalo and the media is who they are, and most of the media is from here. I was here. I grew up in East Aurora. I have family here, so you think about those things, and I think there was a little bit of tact and some compassion that we felt, and some responsibility in not only how you gather the news, but how you articulate what you're saying, because my dad's watching. You might be watching. And it's a tough thing. And, and again, I'm amazed at the strength of your family, not only through this whole thing, but that evening and the days to follow. It was unbelievable.
And some families react differently. John, in your case, you were very forward to talk to the media. Some families, we've never heard from, honestly,
right.
over the course of even the 5 years. And there was such a diverse number of people on that plane, artists, musicians, political leaders. There were so many various students. There was so many interesting people who were gathered together. But let's talk about your daughter now and the legacy, because we showed the website earlier in the segment, and you're doing an awful lot for others in the community.
My older daughter, Laura, actually started Ellie's Angels. She was on her way to a cheer competition the morning after the plane crash. Ellie and Laura grew up cheerleaders. They were this big, they were always cheerleaders. And when we lost Ellie, Laura wanted to do something to memory. They were very close. They call each other best friends, as sisters. And so she had this idea about starting Ellie's Angels. And they do a couple of things. One is mentor young ladies. That's one of the big things they do. They've had hundreds of young ladies from around Western New York come to Ride for Roswell, Carly's Club, name a charity in Western New York, and the girls are at it, helping, serving, whatever they do. They also raised many tens of thousands of dollars to help families in need. There was one young lady who was hit by a van. She's wheelchair bound, and I think they raised $15,000 or $16,000 2 years ago for her, and they do that every year. And the other is Ellie had a passion for family law. She was going to be an attorney, and it's particularly adoption law. So we decided to take some of those funds and help with hard-to-place adoptions with Adoption Star in Western New York. So we do that almost daily.
Well, it's a real tribute to your daughter and to you. We talked a little bit about news and politics, and we talked about now it's the 5-year mark, and we mentioned this, John, when we spoke earlier. And Steve, maybe you'll agree or not. As more time goes by, in the news cycle of things, it becomes sort of an asterisk. Not to diminish what happened, but there are other news stories that how do you, as a newsman, what advice would you have to John and the families to keep the story as current as possible based on the work that they've done?
I continue to do events like this, and always making sure, like you're doing, is that number one, you're continuing to push for change and getting their story out. I think the worst thing that people can do is retreat on something like this. And, I'm never going to judge anyone who's in that specific, because it's such a horrible thing, and I don't even know how I would react. But doing what you did the way you did it was perfect in my estimation, just because you are keeping her memory alive. You did fight for change, in the aviation industry, and not only with law changes, but I think on a personal level, seeing the things that you're doing in the community that affect other families, like the adoption, and like the charitable giving. To me, that's not that the aviation laws are not important, because they are, but when you affect someone directly like that, you never know whose life you're changing or affecting.
Right.
And I think that's what media needs to do. That's what we need to do more of, and that's what you need to see, those types of things and those types of stories being told. That's what I mean. And always fight, and always, I was a fighter anyways. I was the investigative guy, right? I mean, I was the jerk, being the reporter that has to do those difficult things. Fight for your family.
Some final thoughts on the 3407 5th anniversary of the crash when we come back. There's the website. It's 3407 Memorial, 3407memorial.com. It gives you the background on what happened and what the families are doing, and it has all the information about the changes in airline safety that was spurred by this terrible tragedy. Scott, some final thoughts on what this did to you as a person in your life, not only when you were supervising Clarence, but now as an attorney. How it's changed your life?
I would say every time that the anniversary comes up, it's become a little bit more difficult every year. My son was born a few months before the crash of 3407. He was born on Election Day in 2008. And I love my family, I love my wife and my children, and just the contrast between the love of life and, unfortunately, the loss of the loved ones really strikes home. And it's if anything, it's helped me to remember to live in the moment, live in the present, and hope for the future, but remember what you have and cherish what you have right now.
And John, the families are going to gather together at the site several times this year, February 12th being the first.
On the anniversary, the families usually come in from all over the country, and we get together and have a service, and then we do a vigil down on the crash site and read the names and remember those we lost, and just have a moment for each other.
And the run that comes up is in the fall, you said.
This year it's in October. Jill Walensky's going to chair it this year, and she did a great job. So she'll be on the site and putting all the information out, but they'll have it every year as far as we know.
So that's how the families will keep the memories of loved ones alive and continue the fight to make airline safety better for all of us. John, thank you very much. You have a final thought?
I was just saying what we do with those funds that we raise is either put them towards a memorial, or the last couple of years we've been giving them to local charities, just again to thank the community for being there with us. So we take those funds and distribute them to charities in Western New York.
Thanks for joining us and sharing the story and remembering a tragedy that you have turned into something good for so many others as you and the other families. Scott, good luck to you, and thank you for sharing your poignant thoughts. And Steve, always good to see you, and thanks for everything you've done. We'll see you gentlemen soon, and good luck to you all, and good luck to you, and thank you for watching here on WBBZ-TV.